Are you waiting for someone?
No.
Then why are you standing alone out here?
Sometimes it is easier to stand outside.
That is a strange answer.
Maybe, but it is the truth.
You don't look like someone who belongs on this street, and you look like someone who is trying very hard not to feel lonely.
You noticed that quickly.
Lonely people recognize each other.
The first thing Daniel noticed when he woke up was the silence. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy. The soft Lagos morning light slipped through the wide glass windows of his luxury apartment in Victoria Island. But something felt wrong. Daniel sat up slowly. The other side of the bed was empty, cold, his heart tightened. "Elena?" he called softly. No answer. He stood quickly and walked toward the living room. Still nothing. But then he noticed something strange. On the dining table, there was a small folded note, and beside it, a thin silver bracelet. Daniel's chest tightened as he slowly opened the note. His eyes scanned the words written in careful handwriting, and the moment he finished reading, his hands began to shake because the message on the paper said only 6 simple words: "Thank you, but please don't find me." Daniel stood frozen in the quiet apartment. The woman he had met only hours earlier, the woman who had somehow broken through his guarded heart in a single night, was gone, and she had left behind a mystery that would not let him rest. But the truth was, this story did not begin that morning. It began the night before. Daniel Cole was a man who had everything: money, respect, power. At 38 years old, he owned one of the fastest-growing construction companies in Lagos. In his office tower overlooked the busy streets of Ikoyi, and his name carried weight in business meetings across the city. But Daniel had one problem. He trusted no one. 5 years earlier, his life had collapsed in a way he never expected. The woman he had planned to marry had betrayed him, not just emotionally, but financially. She had secretly worked with a rival company and leaked information that nearly destroyed Daniel's business. The betrayal had been brutal. The heartbreak even worse. Since then, Daniel had made one rule for his life: no attachments, no love, no vulnerability, just business, just success. And quiet nights alone in his large apartment. He told himself he preferred it that way, but sometimes loneliness speaks louder than pride. That evening had been long, a difficult board meeting, a frustrating deal that refused to close, and too many glasses of whiskey at a quiet bar in Lekki Phase 1. The rain had just stopped when Daniel stepped outside. The street glowed under wet streetlights, cars moved slowly through puddles on the road, and that was when he saw her, standing alone near a small cafe across the street. A young woman, simple clothes, no umbrella, no phone in her hand, just standing there quietly, like she had nowhere else to go. Daniel almost ignored her. Almost. But something about her stillness caught his attention. She looked calm, but her eyes carried something heavy: pain, loneliness, the kind Daniel recognized too well. Without thinking too much, he crossed the street. And that was when the conversation began. Up close, Daniel noticed she was younger than he first thought. Maybe 26 or 27. Her hair was tied back loosely, her dress was simple but clean, and despite the tired look in her eyes, she carried herself with quiet dignity. "What is your name?" Daniel asked. "Elena," she replied. The name sounded unusual, but Daniel did not question it. "And yours?" "Daniel." She nodded slowly. They stood in silence for a few seconds. The city hummed around them. Then Daniel spoke again. "You shouldn't be standing alone this late." "I have stood alone many nights," Elena said softly. The words were calm, but something about them felt heavy. Daniel studied her carefully. "You waiting for someone?" "No." "Then what are you doing here?" She gave a small smile. "I'm trying to decide what tomorrow will look like." Daniel frowned slightly. "That sounds serious." "Maybe it is." Another quiet moment passed, then Daniel made a decision. "Come with me." Elena blinked. "What?" "Just dinner, somewhere warm, somewhere quiet." She looked unsure. "I don't know you." "That's true," Daniel said. "But tonight, maybe we can just be two strangers who don't want to feel alone." Elena stared at him, studying him carefully. Then slowly, she nodded. They went to a small late-night restaurant not far from the beach. The place was quiet. Soft music played in the background. A few couples sat at distant tables. For the first 20 minutes, they barely spoke. But slowly, something changed. Eleanor began to talk, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. And the more she spoke, the more Daniel felt something strange happening inside his chest. She was intelligent, thoughtful, kind. She spoke about books she loved, and about helping people, about believing that even broken lives could be repaired. Daniel found himself laughing, something he had not done freely in years. "You're different," he said at one point. Elena tilted her head. "How?" "You speak like someone who has suffered, but still believes in good things." Her smile faded slightly. "Believing in good things is sometimes the only thing that keeps people alive." The sentence hung in the air. Daniel felt something tighten inside him. "E.g., who hurt you?" he asked gently. Eleanor looked away. "That is a long story. I have time." But she shook her head. "Maybe another night." Another night, the words echoed softly in Daniel's mind, because for the first time in years, he realized he wanted to see someone again. It was almost 2:30 a.m. when they finally left the restaurant. The ocean breeze was cool, streetlights flickered along the empty road. Daniel walked beside her toward his car. "You should let me take you home," he said. Eleanor hesitated, then she spoke quietly. "I don't really have a home right now." Daniel looked at her. "What do you mean?" She forced a small smile. "Life has been complicated lately." Daniel studied her carefully, then he said something unexpected. "You can stay at my place tonight." Elena's eyes widened. "Daniel?" "It's just a place to sleep," he said calmly. "No expectations." She stared at him, trying to read his face. And somehow, she believed him. "All right," she said softly. Back at Daniel's apartment, the city lights stretched across the lagoon outside the window. Eleanor stood quietly near the glass. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel poured 2 glasses of water. "Most nights I don't even notice the view." They sat on the couch, talking, not about dramatic things, just small pieces of life, childhood, dreams, regrets. Hours passed, but neither of them felt tired. And slowly, Daniel felt something he had not felt in years. Peace. At one point, Eleanor looked at him carefully. "You hide your pain very well," Daniel chuckled. "Do I?" "Yes, but it's still there." He looked down at his hands. "You're very observant." "I've had to be." Another quiet moment passed, then Eleanor asked something unexpected. "Daniel, do you believe people can change each other's lives?" Daniel thought for a long moment. "I used to. And now?" He looked at her, and something honest slipped out. "I stopped believing that." Eleanor studied his face, then she said softly, "Maybe you stopped believing too soon." By the time they finally went to bed, the sky was beginning to grow pale. They had talked the entire night. And Daniel realized something strange. He did not want the conversation to end. But eventually sleep came, and when Daniel closed his eyes, he felt something warm inside his chest, a feeling he thought he had lost forever. Hope. But when morning came, everything changed. The name on the bracelet would not leave Daniel's mind. He stood in the quiet living room of his apartment, the morning sun now fully pouring through the tall glass windows. The city of Lagos had already begun its usual rush. Car horns in the distance, buses rumbling through the streets, people shouting greetings from roadside stalls. But inside Daniel's apartment, everything felt strangely still. In his hand was the thin silver bracelet Elena had left behind. Daniel read the engraving again. Grace Medical Center, Ward C12. Above it was a name, but not Elena. The name read Aisha Bello. Daniel frowned. Aisha. His chest tightened. Why would Eleanor be wearing a bracelet with someone else's name? And why had she left it behind? He placed the note beside it again and stared at both objects. "Thank you, but please don't find me." The words felt heavy. Daniel ran a hand through his hair and paced slowly across the living room. "Who are you, really?" he murmured. It had only been one night. One single night, yet something about Elena had already unsettled him in a way he could not explain. Her calm voice, her sad eyes, the way she listened when he spoke, and the strange warmth he had felt sitting beside her. He had not felt that kind of connection in years. Now she was gone, and somehow the apartment felt emptier than it had ever felt before. Daniel told himself he should forget about it. People met strangers all the time in Lagos. Sometimes they shared moments, sometimes they disappeared. That was life. But his hand tightened around the bracelet again. Grace Medical Center, Ward C12. Daniel sighed deeply. He was a businessman who managed millionaire deals every week. He had meetings scheduled for the morning, important people waiting for his calls, and he should be focusing on work. Instead, his mind kept returning to Elena, or Aisha, or whoever she truly was. Finally, Daniel grabbed his phone and dialed his office assistant. The phone rang twice. "Good morning, sir," the assistant answered. "Morning, Chidi. You have the board call in 30 minutes. Daniel looked at the bracelet again. "Cancel it." There was silence. Sir, reschedule everything for today. But the investors, I said reschedule. Yes, sir. Daniel ended the call. For a moment he stood there, surprised at himself. This was not like him. Daniel Cole did not cancel business meetings for strangers. But something about Elena refused to leave his thoughts, and before he could talk himself out of it, he picked up his car keys. Traffic on the Third Mainland Bridge moved slowly that morning. The lagoon glittered beneath the sunlight. Daniel barely noticed the view. His thoughts stayed fixed on one thing. At Grace Medical Center, he finally reached the hospital just after 9 in the morning. It was not one of the expensive private hospitals his business partners usually visited. This one looked older, smaller. The paint on the building walls had faded slightly from years of weather. A few nurses walked quickly in and out of the entrance. Relatives of patients sat on wooden benches outside. Some looked tired, some looked worried. Daniel stepped out of his car and walked inside. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. A receptionist looked up from behind a desk. Yes, sir. Daniel held up the bracelet. I need to find someone. The woman glanced at it. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Where did you get that? Daniel hesitated. A friend left it with me. She studied him carefully. Then she pointed down the hallway. Ward C12 is on the second floor. Daniel thanked her and walked toward the stairs. With every step he took, his heart beat faster. He was not sure why. Maybe because something about Elena felt unfinished. Like a story that had suddenly stopped halfway. When he reached the second floor, he saw the sign, Ward C12. The hallway was quiet. A few patients rested on beds behind half-open doors. Daniel walked slowly until he saw a nurse standing near a doorway. Excuse me, he said. Yes? I'm looking for someone named Aisha Bello. The nurse's face changed slightly. Aisha? Yes. She looked at him carefully. Are you family? Daniel hesitated, then he said quietly, No, but I met someone who might be connected to her. The nurse sighed. Aisha has been here for months. Daniel felt a strange tightness in his chest. Months? Yes. What happened? The nurse glanced down the hallway before speaking again. She has a heart condition. Daniel blinked. A serious one. The nurse nodded slowly. Very serious. Daniel's grip on the bracelet tightened. Or is she here now? The nurse shook her head. No. Where is she? The nurse looked confused. You don't know? Know what? She was discharged yesterday morning. Daniel's heart skipped. Yesterday? Yes. But she left with someone. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Who? The nurse frowned. A young woman. Daniel's stomach dropped. A young woman? Yes. She said she was Aisha's sister. Daniel felt his mind spinning. Elena? The nurse tilted her head. Is that her name? Daniel stared at the bracelet again. Now everything felt even more confusing. Elena told me she had no home, he murmured. The nurse sighed. She probably said that because she spends most of her time here. Daniel looked up quickly. What do you mean? She's been taking care of Aisha for months. Every day. Morning until night. Daniel frowned. Why? Because Aisha's treatment is expensive. And Elena has been working 3 different jobs just to keep her alive. Daniel felt something twist painfully in his chest. 3 jobs? For months? But why didn't she say anything? Daniel asked quietly. The nurse gave a tired smile. People like Elena rarely talk about their struggles. Daniel swallowed slowly. What exactly is wrong with Aisha? The nurse's voice softened. She needs surgery. Daniel's heart pounded. What kind of surgery? A heart transplant. The words hit him like a sudden wave. A transplant? Yes. And the waiting list is long. How long? The nurse sighed again. Too long? Daniel stared at the floor. His mind replayed the entire night he had spent with Elena. Her calm voice, her gentle smile, the sadness hidden behind her eyes. Now it made sense. She had not been mysterious. She had been exhausted, carrying pain he never even noticed. Where did they go? Daniel asked suddenly. The nurse shook her head. I don't know. But she left this morning very early. Daniel felt panic rising inside him. Did she say anything before leaving? The nurse thought for a moment, then she nodded slowly. Yes. What? She said she was going to try one last thing. Daniel frowned. One last thing? Yes. To save her sister. Daniel's chest tightened. What does that mean? The nurse hesitated, then she said quietly, She said if she couldn't raise the money for surgery, she might have to do something she would regret forever. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of thing? The nurse shook her head. I didn't ask. But the way she said it, Daniel leaned forward. Yes? The nurse's voice dropped. It sounded like she was about to sacrifice something very important. Daniel stood there in silence. His mind raced. Then suddenly, a terrible possibility entered his thoughts. His eyes widened. No, he whispered under his breath. Eleanor, what are you planning to do? Daniel walked quickly back toward the stairs. His heart was pounding now. Something about the nurse's words felt wrong, dangerous. Elena had spent months trying to save her sister, working 3 jobs, sleeping barely a few hours each night. And now, she had disappeared the morning after spending one strange night with him. Daniel suddenly remembered something. During their conversation at the restaurant, Eleanor had asked him a strange question. Do you believe people can change each other's lives? At the time, he had not thought much about it. But now, the question felt different. Like it had meant something deeper. Daniel reached the hospital parking lot and stopped beside his car. His phone vibrated suddenly. He looked down at the screen. A new message. Unknown number. Daniel opened it slowly. The message contained only one sentence. And when he read it, his entire body froze. The message said, "If you care about Elena, come to Aja Bridge before sunset." Daniel's heart began pounding violently. Below the message was a picture, and the moment he saw the photo, the blood drained from his face because the image showed Elena. Standing on the edge of the bridge, looking down at the dark water below, and behind her, 2 men were watching her closely. Daniel whispered in shock, Elena. But the message continued. One final sentence appeared beneath the photo. Bring 5 million naira, or she jumps. Daniel's hands began to shake. The night he thought meant nothing had suddenly become something far more dangerous than he ever imagined. And now, the woman he had met only hours ago was standing on the edge of a bridge, with strangers controlling her fate. Daniel stared at the message again, his heart hammered so loudly he could almost hear it in his ears. Though the photo on his phone screen showed Eleanor standing on the edge of Aja Bridge. The wind lifted strands of her hair as she looked down toward the dark water below. Behind her stood 2 men, tall, broad, watching her like guards. The message still glowed beneath the image. Bring 5 million naira, or she jumps. Daniel felt anger rise inside him. Who are these people? He muttered. Only a few hours earlier, Elena had been sitting across from him at a quiet restaurant table, smiling gently while they talked about life and hope. Now she was standing on a bridge like a prisoner. Daniel clenched his jaw. He did not know Elena well. In truth, he barely knew her at all. But something deep inside him refused to ignore this. He quickly dialed the unknown number. The phone rang once, then twice. Finally, a rough voice answered, "You got the message." Daniel kept his voice calm. "Gee, who are you?" "That doesn't matter. What do you want with Elena?" A dry chuckle came through the phone. "She owes money," Daniel frowned. "Elena?" "Yes." "How much?" 5 million. Daniel looked at the photo again. "That's not Elena's debt." "It became hers." "How?" "Because of her sister." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "Aisha?" "Yes." The man's voice turned colder. "Hospital bills are expensive." Daniel clenched his fist. So you're blackmailing her?" "No. We're collecting what is owed." "And if I don't bring the money?" The man paused for a moment. Then he spoke slowly. "Then you'll watch her jump." The call ended. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. His mind raced. 5 million naira was not a huge amount for him. He could transfer it in seconds. But something about the situation felt wrong. Too easy. Too planned. He walked back to his car and sat behind the steering wheel. For a few seconds, he simply stared through the windshield. Then he whispered quietly, "Elena, what have you gotten yourself into?" Traffic toward Aja was already heavy by midday. Okadas zigzagged through cars. Street vendors moved between vehicles selling bottled water and snacks. But Daniel barely noticed any of it. His thoughts were fixed on Elena. He remembered the way she listened carefully when he spoke, the way her smile had seemed soft but tired, and the strange calmness she carried. She had spent months fighting to save her sister, working 3 jobs, losing sleep, carrying responsibility that would crush most people. And somehow, she had still found the strength to comfort a lonely stranger like him. Daniel gripped the steering wheel harder. "She didn't deserve this," he murmured. The closer he drove toward Aja Bridge, the heavier his chest felt, because another thought had begun forming in his mind. What if Elena had planned to sacrifice herself? What if the men had forced her into a choice she believed was the only way to save her sister? Daniel shook his head. No. He refused to believe that. Not yet. The wind blew hard across Arja Bridge. Below, the lagoon water moved slowly, reflecting the pale afternoon sky. Eleanor stood near the railing. Her hands trembled slightly. One of the men behind her spoke. "Your friend is coming." Eleanor did not turn around. "You shouldn't have dragged him into this." The man shrugged. "You gave us his number." "I didn't know you would do this." "Well, now you know." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Her thoughts were filled with the image of Aisha lying weakly in a hospital bed. Her sister's quiet voice, her small, hopeful smile. Aisha had always believed Eleanor could fix everything, but Eleanor knew the truth. She had tried everything. 3 jobs, borrowing money, selling the few valuables she owned. And still it was not enough. The surgery cost more than she could ever raise alone. Then these men had appeared. Loan sharks. They had offered money quickly, but the interest had grown like a monster. And now the debt had become impossible. One of the men stepped closer. "You should be grateful." Eleanor looked back at him. "For what?" "For your rich boyfriend." Eleanor frowned. "He's not my boyfriend." The man smirked. "He will be today." Eleanor felt a wave of guilt wash over her. And Daniel had only met her for one night. He had shown her kindness when she had nowhere to go. And now he was being pulled into a nightmare that had nothing to do with him. "I never meant for him to get involved," she whispered. But the men ignored her. They were watching the road. Waiting. Daniel's car finally rolled onto the bridge. His eyes searched the road ahead. And then he saw them, 3 figures near the railing. His chest tightened immediately. Uneven from a distance, he recognized Elena. She stood facing the water. Her posture looked small, fragile. The 2 men behind her looked large and threatening. Daniel pulled the car to the side and stepped out. The wind hit him instantly. "Elena," he called. She turned. The moment their eyes met, Daniel saw something that made his heart ache. Relief, mixed with fear. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly. Daniel walked closer. Of course I came." One of the men stepped forward. "You bring the money?" Daniel looked at him calmly. "Yes." "Where is it?" "In the car." The man nodded toward the vehicle. "Go get it." Daniel walked back slowly, but instead of opening the trunk, he stopped. Then he turned back. "I want her released first." The man laughed loudly. "You think we're stupid?" Daniel's voice remained steady. "I'm not handing over money while she stands on the edge of a bridge." The second man stepped closer to Eleanor. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder. The message was clear, one push. That was all it would take. Daniel felt a surge of anger. "Don't touch her," he said sharply. The man smiled. "Then hurry." Daniel walked back to the car again. He opened the trunk and pulled out a small black case. Inside it were bundles of cash. He carried it toward them slowly. Every step felt heavy. When he reached them, he placed the case on the ground. "5 million, he said. The first man crouched and opened it. His eyes lit up. "Good." He stood again. Then he looked at Elena. "You're lucky." Elena exhaled slowly. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, but before anyone could move, something unexpected happened. The second man grabbed Eleanor's arm suddenly. Daniel's heart jumped. "What are you doing?" he demanded. The man grinned. We changed our minds." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What?" 5 million covers the old debt." He leaned closer to Elena. "But she still owes us interest." Daniel felt his anger explode. "You said 5 million." "Yes, and now we say 10. Elena shook her head desperately. "Please, don't do this." Daniel stepped forward. "Let her go." The man laughed. "Or what?" Daniel's fists tightened. "Or I make you regret it." The man suddenly shoved Elena toward the railing. She stumbled dangerously close to the edge. Her foot slipped slightly on the concrete. Daniel's heart nearly stopped. "Elena!" For a terrifying second, her body leaned backward toward the water. The wind howled across the bridge, and everyone froze, because one more step, one tiny movement, could send her falling into the dark lagoon below. The wind roared across Arja Bridge. Cars rushed past in the far lanes, their horns echoing faintly in the distance. But near the railing where Elena stood trembling, the world felt strangely quiet. The knife glinted in the man's hand. "Don't move," he warned again. Daniel froze for a moment, not because he was afraid of the knife, but because Elena's heel was hanging over the edge of the bridge. One wrong movement could send her falling into the dark water below. "Elena, stay still," Daniel said softly. Her breathing was shaky. "I'm trying," she whispered. The second man tightened his grip on her arm. 10 million, he said coldly, "or she goes swimming." Daniel stared at him. "You already have 5. That was the old price." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're lying." The man shrugged. That's business. Daniel's anger burned hot inside his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He slowly raised his hands. All right. The men looked at each other. All right what? The one with the knife asked. I'll get the rest. The man laughed. You think we'll let you leave? No, Daniel replied calmly, but you'll let her go. The knife man shook his head. You're not in control here. Eleanor suddenly spoke. Daniel, don't do it. Both men turned toward her. Quiet, one snapped. But Eleanor kept speaking, her voice trembling but firm. You shouldn't have come here. Daniel looked at her. And leave you here with them. Her eyes filled with tears. You don't even know me. Daniel took a slow step forward. Oh, I know enough. The men shifted uneasily. Stop moving, the knife man shouted. But Daniel ignored him, because something had changed inside him, something powerful, something he had not felt in years. He was no longer thinking like a businessman calculating risks. He was thinking like someone protecting something precious. Elena, Daniel said gently, step toward me. I can't, she whispered. They'll push me. The man holding her arm tightened his grip again. Hunt, try it and you'll fly. Daniel's eyes darkened. You won't touch her again. The knife man scoffed. Big words. Then suddenly, a loud police siren echoed across the bridge. Everyone froze. The two men spun around instantly. 2 police trucks were speeding toward them from the other end of the bridge. The knife man cursed. You called the police? Daniel said nothing, but his eyes stayed fixed on Elena. The man holding her arm suddenly panicked. They're almost here. Grab the money, the knife man shouted. The second man bent quickly to grab the black case, but in that exact moment, Elena twisted her arm free. Run, Daniel shouted. She stumbled forward toward him, but the knife man lunged. His hand grabbed Eleanor's dress, the fabric tore. Eleanor lost her balance again, her foot slipped against the concrete. For a split second, her body tipped backward over the railing. Daniel's heart exploded in panic. Elena! Without thinking, he jumped forward. His hand caught her wrist, just as her body leaned over the edge. Her other hand flailed desperately in the air. The water below looked endless. The knife man tried to pull her back toward him. Daniel pulled the opposite direction. Elena screamed, Don't let go! Daniel tightened his grip with everything he had. I won't. The police sirens grew louder. The 2 criminals panicked. Leave her, one shouted. Ors, we have to go. But the knife man hesitated. Then he kicked the black case of money and ran. Both men sprinted toward a waiting motorcycle parked on the roadside. Within seconds, they were gone. The police trucks screeched to a stop behind Daniel. Officers jumped out, but Daniel barely noticed them, because Eleanor was still hanging over the bridge, her weight pulling against his arm. Hold on, he whispered. Her fingers slipped slightly. Daniel, I'm here. He pulled harder. 2 police officers rushed forward and grabbed Elena's other arm. Together they pulled her safely back onto the bridge. The moment her feet touched the ground, Elena collapsed. Her body shook violently. Daniel dropped beside her instantly. Are you okay? He asked breathlessly. She nodded weakly. Yes, her eyes filled with tears. I thought I was going to fall. Daniel exhaled slowly. You're safe now. The police officers began asking questions nearby, but their voices sounded distant. Eleanor looked at Daniel carefully. Why did you come? Daniel gave a tired smile. Because I couldn't pretend that last night meant nothing. Eleanor stared at him in silence. Then she whispered softly, You shouldn't care this much. Daniel looked into her eyes. Maybe I don't have a choice anymore. The sky had turned orange as the sun began to set. Daniel sat beside Eleanor outside the hospital where Aisha had been treated. The chaos of the bridge felt like a distant memory. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. You saved my life today. Daniel shook his head. No. You saved your own life. Eleanor looked down at her hands. I almost ruined yours. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Eleanor took a deep breath. Then she told him everything. About the loan sharks. About borrowing money to keep Aisha alive. About working endless hours. What about losing hope when the surgery costs kept rising? I didn't know what else to do, she said quietly. Daniel listened carefully. And those men? He asked. They said if I couldn't pay, they would take Aisha away. Daniel's expression hardened. They can't do that. They can, Elena replied sadly. People like them don't follow rules. Daniel looked toward the hospital building. And the surgery? Elena's eyes filled with pain. The doctors said Aisha only has a few months left without it. Daniel felt something heavy inside his chest again. How much? Eleanor hesitated. Then she whispered, 40 million naira. Daniel blinked. That amount was not impossible for him, but it was still significant. Eleanor quickly added, "I'm not asking you for anything." Daniel looked at her. "I know. I already caused enough trouble for you." Daniel leaned back against the bench. "You didn't cause trouble." "Yes, I did. You met me for one night, and now your life is upside down." Daniel looked at her calmly. "My life was already upside down before I met you." Eleanor studied his face. Then she asked softly, "Why are you still here?" Daniel thought for a moment. Then he answered honestly, "Because I don't want you to face this alone." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "You barely know me." Daniel smiled slightly. "Ah, that's true. But I know this." He pointed toward the hospital building. "You spent months fighting to save your sister. You worked 3 jobs. You carried a burden most people would run away from." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears again. "And that tells me everything I need to know." For a moment she could not speak. Then she whispered, "Daniel?" "Yes?" "You're making this harder." "How?" "Because you're being kind." Daniel chuckled quietly. "How is that a bad thing?" Eleanor looked at him carefully. "It is when someone like me doesn't deserve it." Daniel's expression turned serious. "You deserve more than you think." The alarm inside the hospital echoed through the hallway, sharp, loud, terrifying. Eleanor stood frozen outside the emergency room door. Through the glass window she could see doctors surrounding Aisha's bed. One doctor pressed down on her chest, another adjusted the oxygen mask, and the heart monitor beside the bed beeped weakly. Then suddenly, the sound became long and flat, a continuous tone. Elena's world stopped. "No," she whispered. Her legs trembled. Daniel quickly stepped beside her and held her shoulders. "Elena." She shook her head slowly, tears already falling down her face. "No, please." Inside the room, the doctors continued working quickly. "Clear." One doctor pressed the defibrillator paddles against Aisha's chest. A powerful shock ran through her body. Her small frame jerked on the bed. The monitor flickered. For one terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly, beep! A weak heartbeat returned. Eleanor gasped. Her knees nearly gave way. Daniel tightened his grip on her arms to steady her. The doctors continued working carefully. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, one of the doctors stepped outside the room. He removed his gloves and sighed deeply. Eleanor rushed toward him. "Oh, doctor, please tell me she's okay." The doctor looked tired. "We were able to bring her back." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears again. "Thank God." But the doctor raised a hand gently. "There is something you must understand." Her heart sank. "What?" "Aisha's condition is getting worse." Daniel stepped forward. "What does that mean?" The doctor spoke calmly but seriously. "She cannot survive many more episodes like this." Eleanor's voice trembled. "How long does she have?" The doctor hesitated. Then he said quietly, "Without surgery, maybe a few weeks." The hallway suddenly felt cold. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "A few weeks?" Daniel looked at the doctor. "And with surgery?" The doctor answered carefully. "With a transplant, she could live a full life." Eleanor closed her eyes. 40 million naira. The number echoed in her mind again. Money she had spent months trying to gather. Money she still did not have. And Daniel turned toward the doctor. "When can the surgery happen?" The doctor looked surprised. "If the funds are secured and a donor heart becomes available." Daniel nodded slowly. "How soon?" "Possibly within days." Eleanor looked at Daniel quickly. "You don't have to ask that." But Daniel ignored her. He looked back at the doctor. "If the money is paid, you will start the process immediately?" "Yes." Daniel nodded once. "Good." Eleanor frowned. "Daniel." He turned toward her. "Shai, it's done." She blinked in confusion. "What?" "I'll pay for the surgery." Eleanor stared at him as if she had misheard. "No." "Yes." "No, Daniel." Her voice grew stronger. "I can't accept that." Daniel looked at her calmly. "You're not accepting it. You're saving your sister. That's different." Eleanor shook her head firmly. "It's too much. 40 million naira is not something someone just gives away." Daniel smiled slightly. "Oh, maybe not. But I'm not giving it away." Eleanor frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel looked toward the emergency room where Aisha lay. "I'm investing it." "In what?" "In a future." Eleanor stared at him silently. Then she whispered, "Why would you do that for someone you barely know?" Daniel took a slow breath. Then he answered honestly, "Because last night, something changed." Eleanor's eyes softened. "What changed?" Daniel looked directly into her eyes. "Call me." The hallway fell quiet again. For the first time since the nightmare on the bridge, Elena allowed herself to smile, a small, emotional smile. "You're unbelievable," she whispered. Daniel chuckled softly. "No. I'm just a man who finally realized something important." "What?" "That sometimes the most important people in your life arrive unexpectedly." The waiting room of Grace Medical Center felt very different now. The surgery had taken hours, long, terrifying hours. But finally, the doctor had come out smiling. The transplant had been successful. Now Aisha was recovering, slowly, but steadily. Elena sat beside the hospital bed, watching her sister sleep peacefully. For the first time in months, Aisha's breathing sounded calm, healthy. Daniel stood quietly near the window. Elena turned toward him. "You saved her life." Daniel shook his head. "No, you did. You never stopped fighting for her." Elena looked down at Aisha, and then she said softly, "I almost lost hope." Daniel stepped closer. "But you didn't." Elena looked up at him. "And neither did you." A comfortable silence filled the room. Then Elena spoke again. "Daniel." "Yes?" "There's something I never told you." "What?" She hesitated. "The night we met, I wasn't standing outside that cafe by accident." Daniel frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Elena took a deep breath. "I had just left the hospital after the doctors told me Aisha might die." Her voice trembled. "I didn't know what to do anymore." Daniel listened carefully. "I was standing there trying to gather the courage to disappear." Daniel's chest tightened. "You mean, yes. I was thinking about ending everything." The words hung in the air. Daniel slowly sat down beside her. "But then you came," Elena said quietly. "And you treated me like I mattered." Daniel looked down at his hands. "I just offered you dinner." Elena shook her head. "You gave me something much bigger than dinner." "What?" "Hope." Daniel felt something warm inside his chest again. "You gave me hope too," he said softly. Elena tilted her head. "How?" "For years I believed love was a mistake." "And now?" Daniel smiled gently. "Now I'm not so sure." Elena looked at him carefully. Then she asked quietly, "So what happens now?" Daniel looked toward the window. The Lagos skyline stretched across the horizon. Then he turned back to her. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you'll let this be more than just one night." Elena's eyes widened slightly. "You mean us?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." She thought about it for a long moment. Then slowly, she reached out and took his hand. "All right," Daniel smiled. "All right?" "Yes. But there's one condition." Daniel laughed softly. "What condition?" Elena squeezed his hand gently. You have to promise something." "What?" "That you'll never pick up strangers for one night again." Daniel chuckled. "Deal." Then he looked at her warmly. "Besides, I already found the one I was meant to pick up." Elena laughed softly, and in that quiet hospital room, two lives that had collided on a lonely night in Lagos began something neither of them had expected. Not a single night, but a lifetime. Where are you watching from? Comment your city and country. What did this story teach you? Share your thoughts below. Subscribe for more inspiring, emotional stories.